Don't touch me, you stupid black girl." The words, sharp and venomous, sliced through the refined hum of the Four Seasons Beverly Hills ballroom like a gunshot in a library. They shattered the clinking of silverware, silenced the soft jazz, and froze the hushed conversations of millionaires and power players. Every eye turned, every phone subtly tilted into record mode. Arthur Sterling, the billionaire CEO of Sterling Nova Technologies, didn't flinch. He merely adjusted his cufflink, annoyed by the few drops of spilled Bordeaux now marring his tailored jacket. Across the table, Aisha Davies stood motionless, a folded cloth still in her hand, a bottle of water in the other. She didn't speak, she didn't cry, she didn't apologize, she didn't need to. What Arthur Sterling couldn't possibly have known was that Aisha wasn't just any waitress working a high-stakes investor dinner. She was Elliot Strauss's daughter, adopted at 7, graduated top of her class. A former college track star with a full scholarship, dreams of the Olympics and endorsements. But reality had other plans, and bills piled up after her mother passed away from cancer and her father was absent. She became both sister and mother to her 10-year-old brother, Elijah, who had cerebral palsy and endless needs. She took on 3 jobs, including overnight shifts, to support him, always doing the hard things quietly. Aisha was moonlighting at this luxury hotel not out of desperation, but by choice, to observe, to learn, to expose. She had turned down easier jobs, understanding that working the elite floor, where the world's most powerful men wined and dined, gave her something money couldn't: access and insight. She watched, listened, and learned how power moved in silence, how kindness was rare, and how cruelty disguised as confidence was often applauded. Most importantly, she learned that the people who are ignored the most often know the most. Tonight, Arthur hadn't just insulted a black woman. He had insulted the most important person in the room, and he did it with cameras rolling and the future of his $3.5 billion deal hanging by a thread. Because what was about to happen would change everything. Arthur Sterling, at 38, had clawed his way to the top of the tech world. He was ruthless in negotiations, unforgiving in boardrooms, and built his empire not by being liked, but by being feared. He believed business was war, and in war, you made casualties, not friends. His private belief was simple. People were tools, only useful if they worked. So when he entered the ballroom, he didn't see people. He saw chess pieces. Elliot Strauss, the billionaire investor from San Francisco, was the king he needed to impress. Everyone else, especially the waitstaff, were pawns, background noise. Arthur never looked servers in the eye, never said thank you, never considered how someone carrying a tray might one day carry a voice or something much more dangerous. He was arrogant but not stupid, skilled at reading contracts, but he never learned, never valued character. And on this night, that blind spot would cost him everything. The ballroom shimmered, a dreamscape of white linen, crystal, and soft string quartet music. It was an event where billion-dollar futures were whispered, alliances sealed with wine, and reputations broken with a smirk. All attention centered on Elliot Strauss, a 72-year-old German-born investor, a quiet storm in a world of thunder. His firm, Strauss Holdings, had backed ethical ventures, and what made him dangerous wasn't just his money, but his silence. Tonight, he was considering a $3.5 billion acquisition of Sterling Nova Technologies. Aisha stood just steps away, her crisp uniform, tied-back hair, and flawless posture making her seem like background music, present, essential, but unnoticed. She moved with quiet precision, having memorized every detail from Strauss's dietary preferences to Arthur's favorite wine pairing. She was prepared, but not for what came next. As she leaned in to pour Chateau Margaux for Arthur, the glass tipped slowly, deliberately. Deep red Bordeaux spilled across the white tablecloth, crawling toward his custom monogram. "I'm so sorry, sir," Aisha said softly, her hand instantly reaching with a cloth napkin. It was instinct, years of experience, but Arthur saw only an offense. "Don't touch me, you stupid black girl," he hissed, his voice surgical, precise, cold, designed to cut through flesh and dignity alike. The entire table froze. Conversation stopped. Forks hovered. The quartet let its final note hang in the air. Aisha stood still, eyes lowered. She had heard worse, but this was different. The room had heard it too. Arthur didn't apologize. He reached for a new napkin as if swatting a mosquito. One of his executives let out an awkward, nervous laugh. Aisha didn't move, her stillness, louder than any shout. Across the table, Elliot Strauss set down his fork, his gaze shifting to Arthur with the weight of a gavel. "Please enjoy your meal," Aisha finally said, her voice even, calm, devoid of anger, holding only a deeper resolve. The room struggled to restart, small talk mechanical and forced. Phones buzzed, some recording, some sending messages. The damage was done, but not to Aisha. The real crack was beneath Arthur's feet, and by the time he realized it, he was already falling. Elliot remained completely still, the kind of stillness that says, "I saw everything, and I don't forget." He had seen men like Arthur his entire life, and his mother had taught him the value of silence as strategy. "When someone tells you who they are," she used to say, "watch. They always show their truth when they think no one important is watching." Tonight, Arthur had shown his truth. Elliot had admired Aisha's grace, the tension in her shoulders, the pause behind her eyes, the pause of someone deciding whether to break or to rise. Aisha had chosen to rise. More than admiration, Elliot felt confirmation. Aisha had insisted on working this job, declining his offers for a consulting position or leadership role because she wanted to understand American business from the basement, not the boardroom. Now he understood why. Arthur Sterling had just made the most expensive mistake of his career. Elliot leaned toward his assistant and whispered in German, "It's time." Arthur, still oblivious, resumed talking, laughing too loudly, trying to brush the moment under the velvet rug of high society. Elliot wasn't brushing anything away. He was writing it down, in memory, in principle, and soon in action. Because when character is tested in public, consequences should follow in public too. The courses kept coming, but the appetite was gone. Arthur, still trying to recover the room, leaned into his pitch. "You know what separates winners from whiners?" he asked, his voice slicing through the table. "Winners get over distractions. They focus. They dominate." His executives nodded too quickly, begging him to move past the incident. Elliot just picked up his water glass, took a single sip, and set it back down, unwavering in his gaze. Aisha returned with the next course, roasted duck, serving Strauss first, then his assistants, then the other investors, and Arthur last. Arthur watched, jaw tight, muttering under his breath, "Still learning her place, I see." Aisha didn't respond or flinch, placing the last plate with the same care she'd shown all night, then turning to refill glasses. Elliot observed her poise, her soft smile to an elderly couple, the way she gently returned a crayon to a child. This wasn't just service. This was grace under pressure. Arthur, for all his power, couldn't recognize it. He only saw someone beneath him to be corrected, dismissed, ignored. "Let's talk numbers, Mr. Strauss," Arthur said, trying to pivot. $3.5 billion, full integration within 2 quarters. We'll double your ROI in under 18 months. Elliot tilted his head. "Before we discuss numbers," he said calmly, "I prefer to observe values." A chill moved through the table. This dinner wasn't about contracts anymore. It was about character, and Arthur had just failed the first course. Aisha approached the table again, this time with a water pitcher. The tension was dense, heavy. As She tilted the pitcher toward Arthur's glass. His hand shot out, grabbing her wrist tightly. "You wait until I finish speaking," he hissed, his voice low, thick with wine. "When real business is happening, you don't interrupt. You stand still like the help is supposed to." His grip lingered. Eyes turned. Aisha met his stare, calm, not shaken, not small. "Yes, sir," she said quietly, her tone neutral but unbreakable. "I understand completely." Then gently, without force, she pulled her wrist from his grasp and stepped back. Arthur blinked, surprised she hadn't flinched, disappointed his intimidation hadn't landed. But Aisha didn't retreat. She simply moved to the next guest, her dignity intact, her silence louder than anything else in the room. Elliot Strauss slowly, deliberately, placed his silverware down again. He leaned to his assistant and said just 2 words in German. "It's time." The assistant nodded, stood, and disappeared through a side door. Arthur went on talking, still trying to sell himself, but everyone at the table knew something had shifted. It wasn't just about spilled wine or an insult anymore. It was about the repeat offense, the kind that says, "This isn't a mistake. This is who I am." And now that truth was witnessed. Consequences were no longer a matter of if, only when. Arthur was still talking when Elliot Strauss rose from his seat. He didn't make a speech, not at first. He simply stood, slowly, quietly, like a storm gathering, wait before thunder. His movement alone silenced the table, then the room. Elliot looked at Aisha. She met his eyes, steady, calm, unreadable. With a nod that felt like both permission and acknowledgement, he turned back to the table. "Mr. Sterling," Elliot said, his voice even, almost gentle. "Before we move forward, there is someone very important I'd like you to meet properly." Arthur frowned, confused. "Of course," he said, forcing a smile. "Are you referring to one of your VPs or your general counsel?" Elliot didn't answer directly. He raised a hand, gesturing toward the back of the room. From the far wall, Aisha stepped forward, no tray in hand, no apron on her waist, just the quiet confidence of someone with nothing to hide and everything to reveal. She stopped beside Elliot, not behind him. "This," Elliot said, resting a hand gently on her shoulder, "is Aisha Davies, my daughter." The air cracked like glass under pressure. "She was adopted when she was 7. She chose to keep her birth name, but make no mistake. She is my daughter, and I am every bit her father." Arthur blinked once, then again, his lips parted, but no words came. "Aisha has been working here," Elliot continued, turning slightly to face the rest of the room. "Not because she needed the income, but because she wanted to understand firsthand how people in power treat those they think are beneath them." He didn't need to raise his voice. "Now tonight, you all witnessed exactly that." A quiet murmur rippled through the guests. Phones tilted higher, eyes widened. The silence was thick with realization. Aisha stood tall, her chin lifted, not triumphant, just truthful, just seen. Elliot looked at Arthur one last time. "The girl you called stupid is the woman I raised to be wiser than most CEOs I've ever met." In that moment, the deal wasn't just in jeopardy, it was already dead. The sound of a chair scraping back shouldn't feel like an earthquake, but tonight it did. Elliot Strauss returned to his seat without another word. The room remained still, Arthur frozen. His forced smile cracked, confidence drained from his face like color from a dying light. Then it started. One guest pushed back their chair and stood up. Then another and another. A ripple of quiet, undeniable movement spread across the room. Phones vibrated. Notifications lit up screens. Some guests began checking their investment apps. Others simply walked out. The Strauss acquisition was unofficially dead, but publicly understood. Arthur Sterling stood there, not yet realizing. His empire had just lost its foundation. Less than 15 minutes later, headlines began hitting financial news outlets. Strauss pulls out of Sterling Nova deal after public incident. Billion-dollar tech CEO faces backlash over racist comment. Investor's daughter called stupid by Sterling, deal terminated on the spot. By the time dessert was served, though, no one touched it. Sterling Nova stock had already begun to plummet. 17% down in less than an hour, then 22%. Panic calls flooded Arthur's phone. Board members, legal advisors, PR reps, investors demanding statements, explanations, demanding someone else in charge. But there was no spin big enough to bury what the world had just seen and what had just gone viral. The moment was now a trending video, shared, clipped, reposted, spawning memes and intensifying headlines. Screenshots spread like wildfire. Within hours, sponsors pulled contracts, strategic partners issued statements of deep concern, and talent at Sterling Nova began resigning in waves. The company Arthur built was unraveling, not from poor strategy, but from the rot at its core finally, being dragged into the light. Arrogance had a price, and tonight it was $3.5 billion, plus the collapse of everything Arthur thought he controlled. At 11:47 p.m., the board voted to suspend him. At 12:14 a.m., his access to company servers was revoked. By sunrise, Sterling. Nova wasn't a powerhouse. It was a headline under a single word: fallout. The sun hadn't even cleared the skyline when Aisha Davies stepped into the Strauss Holdings headquarters. No longer in uniform, no tray in hand, she wore a tailored navy blue blazer and flats that meant business, not burden. She wasn't just walking into a new building, she was walking into the next chapter of her life. Waiting for her in the executive wing was a new nameplate: Aisha Davies, Director of Corporate Humanity. The title wasn't decorative or symbolic. It was real, created at Elliott Strauss's insistence, funded with full decision-making authority, and given to a woman who had seen the best and worst of leadership from the ground floor. Later that afternoon, she stood at a company-wide live stream, employees from San Francisco to Singapore tuning in. Some had only seen her face through viral clips. Others had worked alongside her, never knowing who she truly was. Now they would. She stepped to the mic. "Yesterday," she began, "I was called stupid, not because I made a mistake, but because someone believed their title made them more human than me." A pause. "I said nothing in that moment, but today I choose to speak." The room, virtual and physical, was silent. "There's a difference between power and leadership," she continued. "One is taken, the other is earned. I didn't take this seat. I was trusted with it. And I intend to honor that trust." Her voice remained calm, devoid of anger or revenge, only truth. "I believe in companies where people are valued not just for what they produce, but for who they are. I believe every role deserves dignity, every title deserves accountability, and every voice, especially the quiet ones, deserves to be heard." Applause filled the room. Not polite, not corporate, but real, because in Aisha they didn't just see a new leader, they saw a mirror and, finally, a future. What happened that night in the ballroom wasn't just about one CEO and one waitress. It was about all of us. It was about how we treat people when we think no one's watching, how easy it is to value resumes over respect, titles over truth, and power over people. But here's the unsettling truth. Someone is always watching. Sometimes it's a child at the next table, sometimes a colleague at the edge of the room, and sometimes it's the very person you think has no voice, no name, no consequence. Arthur Sterling lost his empire not because of numbers or strategy, but because he failed the simplest test of character, treating another human being with basic dignity. We all face that test every day, at the drive-thru, in a meeting, on the phone with someone who speaks broken English, in an elevator with someone we think can't help our career. Those are the moments that define us, not just as professionals, but as people. Aisha Davies reminded us that strength can be quiet, that dignity isn't given, it's lived, and that real leadership isn't about who talks the loudest, but about who listens the most. So, the next time we feel the urge to dismiss someone, to look past them, to say something small but cutting, perhaps we should pause and ask ourselves one question. If that person turned out to be the one holding the pen over our future, would we be proud of how we treated them? Because sometimes the most powerful people in the room are not the ones at the head of the table. Sometimes they're the ones clearing it. Being decent isn't extra credit. It's the baseline. In the end, how we treat people is the real legacy we leave behind, and it starts with you and me right now.